My in-laws won't stop comparing my wife to her dead sister. Now, they're doing the same to our son, and I've had enough. My wife and I, 33M, have been married for almost 2 years now, and we have a little baby boy. I love my wife more than my own life, and I believe that in any lifetime I would still find her and fall in love with her. My wife had an older sister, Mia, that passed away at 11 months old from a landslide collapsing on their home. She died before my wife was born. They're the only 2 daughters in a family of boys. When I met her family for the first time, everyone was nice, but it got weird when all they would talk about was their late daughter. My mill even showed me photo albums of Mia, which took about 2 hours to get through. I never thought anything of it then, and as much as I loved getting to know my wife's family, I would be more interested in seeing baby photos of my wife, but I just brushed it off. At dinner, they wouldn't stop talking about how if Mia was alive, she would be smarter or even prettier than my wife. I would look at my wife when they said those things, but she would just agree with them. When we got married, the whole process was filled with, Mia would love this. Mia would look great in this. Mia would be more buxom than wife's name, her grandma. My wife would nod and agree each time they said something like this, that even my mother felt something was wrong. I talked to her before about this, and she said, I know she's barely lived, but I know if she was alive she would be so beautiful, smart. I know deep down if you met her, you would love her and not me. I had to trick her to get into therapy because something was definitely wrong, and maybe she was brainwashed. Life was great for 2 years since we moved 8 hours away from my in-laws for my job, but since my BIL just got engaged, my wife is involved in the planning, and just like they did at our wedding, they wanted to plan a memorial for Mia, which is totally fine. Except that they weren't including her grandparents that had recently died, lived full lives, and gave them a hefty amount of inheritance. It wasn't my place, so I remained quiet. But now, my wife's starting to say those self-deprecating things about her in comparison to Mia again. During the engagement party, everyone was gushing over my son about how cute he was, and that, thank God, he took after me. My wife has brown eyes and I have blue eyes. My boy has got the biggest brown eyes that makes me want to stare into them for hours. Yet her mom said, it's a shame he didn't get your eyes, though. If this was Mia's child, he would definitely have blue eyes too, since hers is blue. It took all of me to not roll my eyes, but I just said, wife's name has the most beautiful eyes I have ever seen, and I thank God every day that my son has them. She took that as an awe moment and said, if Mia was alive, I'm sure I would be holding her baby with you now. You would love her very much. I wanted to freaking shout at her, but I always remind myself that people grieve differently, and as long as they need to, but I'm pissed that she keeps her dead daughter on a pedestal, but ignores and belittles her living, breathing one. My wife has been in individual therapy for more than 2 years, but she cut back on some hours after we moved since she felt a lot better. I always tell my wife that I would always choose her, and that she deserves even better than me. My wife's 2 younger brothers that were born after Mia's passing also feel weird about all the Mia comments, but often kept quiet about it. BC, when they would defend my wife when they were younger, my MIL would get emotional and go on a hunger strike. Both of my younger BIL were never compared to Mia. Update 1. It has been a few months since I last posted, and things have escalated in a way that I couldn't have imagined. After that engagement party, the comparisons to Mia began to increase again, and I noticed my wife falling back into old patterns. She became quieter, more withdrawn, and she would sometimes sit in our son's room late at night, just watching him sleep. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me she was afraid of being a disappointment to our son. The way she felt, she was a disappointment to her family. That hit me hard, because I had thought we were past this. I tried talking to her about going back to more regular therapy sessions. She'd cut back a lot after we moved, thinking that the distance from her family would help her heal, but it was clear that their influence still loomed large over her. My wife resisted at first, saying that she didn't need therapy, she just needed more time away from them. But I could see that wasn't the whole truth. She was breaking down again under the weight of their expectations and the ghost of a sister she never knew. Things came to a head when her mother called out of the blue with a strange request. She wanted to set up a memorial room for Mia in our house. At first, I thought I had misheard, but no, she was serious. She said she had been thinking about it ever since we moved, that our house could finally be a place where Mia could have her own space again. I couldn't believe it. My first thought was, what about my wife? What about our son? Why should we be living in a house where Mia, someone who died decades ago, is given more attention than the people who are actually alive? I talked to my wife about it, and while I expected her to shut the idea down immediately, she hesitated. I could tell that she didn't want to do it, but her need to please her mom, to not rock the boat, was weighing heavily on her. I reminded her that this was our home, not a shrine, and that we had to think about what was healthy for our family, especially our son. She agreed, but admitted that she didn't know how to say no without her mother spiraling. I could see the toll this was taking on her. One night, after our son was in bed, she broke down, crying that she felt like she would never be enough for her family. I held her and reminded her that she was more than enough for me, for our son, and that was what mattered. But I could see the doubt in her eyes. Years of being compared to Mia had worn her down so much that she was questioning her own worth. It broke my heart. I knew we had to set some boundaries, so the next time her mom called, we told her firmly that we wouldn't be turning part of our house into a memorial for Mia. Her mom didn't take it well. She accused us of not caring about Mia's memory, of trying to erase her from the family, which was absurd. Mia had been the center of attention for so long, but now it was affecting my wife's mental health, and I couldn't stand by and let that happen. My Mill started crying, saying she felt like she was losing Mia all over again, and then she hung up on us. I expected things to get ugly after that, but what I wasn't prepared for was what came next. A few days after the phone call, my wife got a package in the mail from her mom. Inside was a letter and an old photo album. The letter was emotional, talking about how much her mother missed Mia and how she hoped that we would reconsider setting up a space for her. But the album was the real shocker. It was filled with pictures of Mia, and for the first time, I noticed something strange. Mia's eyes were brown. I couldn't believe it at first. My wife's family had been telling us for years that Mia had blue eyes. Every time they compared my wife to Mia, they would mention how Mia would have had beautiful blue eyes, just like mine. But here was proof, right in front of us, that Mia's eyes were brown, just like my wife's. I didn't know what to make of it, and neither did my wife. She spent hours going through the album, studying each picture like it held the key to some great mystery. Finally, she looked at me and said, "Why would they lie about something like this?" I didn't have an answer. It was bizarre, to say the least, but it felt like there was more to the story than we had ever been told. We decided to confront her mom about it, but when my wife called, her mom didn't answer. Instead, she sent a text saying she was going on a retreat to reconnect with Mia's spirit and wouldn't be available for a while. Classic avoidance tactic. My wife was upset, but I could tell she was also starting to feel a bit of anger. She had spent her whole life being compared to Mia, and now it seemed like the entire foundation of those comparisons was based on a lie. That night, my wife told me something she had never shared before. When she was a teenager, she had overheard her parents talking about how they wished she had been more like Mia. It wasn't the first time she had heard something like that, but this conversation stuck with her because her mom said something strange. She said, "If only she had Mia's heart." At the time, my wife didn't understand what they meant, but now, in light of everything that had happened, it felt like there was something darker at play. Update 2. Things have taken an even more bizarre and disturbing turn. After discovering the truth about Mia's eye color and being stonewalled by her mom, My wife decided to dig deeper into her family's past. She reached out to her brothers, hoping they might know more about Mia and the family's obsession with her. What she uncovered left us both shaken. Her younger brother, let's call him Dan, was the first to talk. He told my wife that when they were kids, their mom would always bring up Mia, but there was something that never sat right with him. He remembered overhearing conversations between their parents late at night, where they talked about Mia in ways that didn't make sense. He said he once heard their dad say, "We can't let her go. She's still with us. We just need to believe." At the time, Dan was too young to understand what that meant, but as he grew older, he started to realize that their mom's grief over Mia wasn't just about losing a daughter. It was about something more, almost like she believed Mia's spirit was still around, guiding their family. Dan admitted that he had always found the way their parents talked about Mia unsettling, but he had kept quiet to avoid upsetting anyone. My wife's other brother, let's call him Sam, was less willing to talk. He said he didn't remember much about Mia and that he had always tried to stay out of the family drama. But when my wife pressed him, he finally revealed something chilling. He said that when he was little, he once asked his mom why she talked about Mia so much. Her response? Because Mia never really left us. She's watching over everything we do. That gave both of us the creeps. What did she mean by that? Was it just a metaphor for keeping Mia's memory alive, or was there something more to it? Things took an even darker turn when we got another letter from my Emil. This time, she wrote that she had been thinking about our conversation and wanted to share something important with us. Inside the envelope was a lock of hair, Mia's hair. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My wife was visibly shaken, and I felt a deep sense of unease. Why would her mom send something like this? What was she trying to tell us? That night, my wife and I had a long talk. We both agreed that her mom's behavior had crossed into dangerous territory, and we needed to distance ourselves for the sake of our mental health and our son's well-being. But there was one thing we couldn't shake, the feeling that there was still more to uncover. Update 3. After the unsettling revelation about Mia's eye color and the strange behavior from my MIL, my wife and I decided to take a step back from her family. We needed space to process everything and figure out what was really going on. But the more we tried to distance ourselves, the more it felt like we were being pulled back into the vortex of her family's obsession with Mia. One evening, while my wife was at therapy, I got a knock on the door. It was her mom. She looked disheveled, like she hadn't slept in days, and she was holding yet another photo album. I didn't want to let her in, but I also didn't want to escalate things, so I invited her inside, hoping we could have a civil conversation. As soon as she sat down, she opened the album and started flipping through the pages. "I need to show you something," she said, her voice shaking. At this point, I didn't know what to expect, but I was not prepared for what she showed me. In the album, there were more photos of Mia, but these were different from the ones we had seen before. They weren't just pictures of her as a baby. There were photos of Mia at various ages, older than 11 months, the age we were told she had died. I was stunned. These pictures showed Mia as a toddler, a young child, and even one where she looked like she was around 6 or 7 years old. But how could that be? We had always been told that Mia died at 11 months old in the landslide. My heart raced as I stared at the photos, trying to make sense of it. I looked at my Emil, who was watching me closely, almost as if she was gauging my reaction. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaky. "These can't be real. Mia died as a baby, didn't she?" My Mill's eyes filled with tears and she shook her head. "I've never told anyone the full story," she whispered. "Not even my husband or my sons. But it's time for the truth to come out. Mia didn't die when she was 11 months old. She lived for a few more years." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could this be true? Why would they lie about something like this? Why didn't you ever tell your family? I asked, trying to wrap my head around the enormity of the situation. My Mael took a deep breath before continuing. Mia was a sick child. After the landslide, she wasn't the same. Physically, she survived, but mentally, something was wrong. We kept her hidden away because we didn't want anyone to see how she had changed. We told everyone she had died because it was easier than explaining what really happened. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process this bombshell. Mia hadn't died in the landslide. She had lived, but her family had hidden her away and pretended she was dead? This was beyond anything I could have imagined. But why keep up the lie for so long? I asked. Why not tell your family the truth at some point? My Mill looked down at her hands, wringing them nervously. Because after a few years, Mia did die. She passed away in her sleep one night when she was around 7 years old. By that point, we had already told everyone she had died as a baby, and it just seemed easier to keep up the lie. We thought we were protecting our family from the pain of knowing what really happened. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This whole time, my wife had been living under the shadow of a sister who had been hidden away, whose life had been erased by her family's lies. And now, after all these years, the truth was finally coming out. But at what cost? Just then, my wife came home from therapy. She saw her mom sitting there with the photo album and immediately knew something was wrong. I could see the fear in her eyes as she sat down next to me. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't know how to tell her, but her mom spoke up before I could say anything. "I'm so sorry," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I've been lying to you your whole life. Mia didn't die when she was a baby. She lived until she was 7. My wife looked at her mom in shock, her mouth hanging open. "What are you talking about? How could you lie about something like that?" Her voice was rising with a mixture of anger and confusion. "Why would you do that to us? To me?" Her mom tried to explain, but my wife wasn't having it. She stood up, pacing the room, her hands in her hair. "I've spent my entire life being compared to her, being told that I wasn't good enough because Mia would have been better. And now you're telling me that the person you've been putting on a pedestal wasn't even the same as the one in my mind? You hid her away and let me believe she was this perfect, untouchable figure, while all this time you knew the truth?" My Mile tried to reach out to her, but my wife stepped back, clearly overwhelmed by the betrayal. I could see the pain in her eyes, the years of feeling inferior, all based on a lie. She turned to me, her voice shaking. "How could she do this to me?" I didn't have an answer. I just held her as she cried, her body shaking with the weight of it all. Her mother sat silently, tears streaming down her face, but there was nothing left to say. The next few days were a blur. My wife was in a state of shock, trying to reconcile the truth about Mia with everything she had been told her whole life. She withdrew from her family entirely, cutting off contact with her mom for the time being. I supported her as best as I could, but I knew this was something that would take time to heal. In the weeks that followed, my wife spent a lot of time in therapy, trying to unpack everything that had come to light. She struggled with feelings of betrayal, anger, and confusion, and it was heartbreaking to watch. The person she had always looked up to, the sister she had never met but had been compared to her entire life, had been hidden away, and now her memory was tainted by the lies her family had told. As for her mom, she tried to reach out several times, but my wife wasn't ready to talk to her. She needed space to process everything on her own terms. I could tell that this was going to be a long road to recovery, but I knew that with time and support, we would get through it together. Our son was still too young to understand what was going on, but I was grateful that we had moved away from her family when we did. The distance gave us the space we needed to rebuild, away from the toxicity of her family's obsession with Mia. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew we were on the right path. In the end, what started as a story about a family's grief over the loss of a child turned into something much darker and more complicated. The lies that were told, the way my wife was raised to believe she would never measure up to her dead sister, and the truth that was hidden for so long, it all took a toll on her mental health. But now, with the truth finally out, we can begin the healing process. It won't be quick, and it won't be easy, but we're moving forward, and that's all that matters. And as for Mia, she may have been a part of my wife's family history, but she no longer has the power to overshadow my wife's life. My wife is her own person, and she deserves to be loved and valued for who she is, not compared to a sister she never knew. That's the future I'm fighting for her and for our son.